So do you want to speak on that a little bit, the conversation you had with Calderon, as well as maybe what are some of the aspects in that really surprised you, that maybe when you were going into that conversation you just didn't expect?
Yeah, I mean, it was funny. I mean, I covered Calderon. I covered all of his rules during the period, very intensely on the ground. When I talked to him, it kind of, I interviewed him in a fairly, in an office in Mexico City, and he was quite open and forthcoming, and it kind of surprised me, an ex-president kind of on that way. Now, the way he was kind of quite open and didn't, it wasn't living in, you think if he'd just been like running, if it was the picture of Calderon as being the kind of Darth Vader figure, the kind of evil emperor figure who was just like making, $10 billion from all this. You think, why would he be in an office, kind of quite a local office in Mexico City talking about it? I mean, he might want to defend his reputation and his legacy, but, I'm not, I don't quite, I don't buy that really, that thing. Now, in terms of his corruption, when I interviewed him, it was when there was accusations around, but it was before Garcia Luna had been taken. He already started distancing himself from Garcia Luna, who was basically his public security secretary, who was a very powerful figure in the administration, who's since been convicted of drug trafficking. So you think, well, if this guy was corrupt, how come Felipe Calderon didn't know? I think Felipe Calderon must have known some stuff, but I don't quite see him as a Darth Vader figure. I think he did have a concept, at least, of trying to reclaim the power of the Mexican state, and wasn't quite as deeply involved. Now I've got other, colleagues, journalists who are like, no, I do believe that like there was money going right into the presidential palace, and he was right in there in the kind of meetings involved in this. And I find that hard to get through, but either way, I think his military crackdown on drug cartels was a failure. I do think it was a failure either way. But a couple of things that strike me. One is this thing called the Merida Initiative, which is basically the U.S., a mechanism where the U.S. gave money to the Mexican military and Mexican government to fight the cartels. And some people will paint that as being, well, the U.S. kind of imposed this war on Mexico. But he said that wasn't true. He said Mexico went to the United States and said, oh, you guys are taking drugs. You've got responsibility. Give us some money. And this is the way Felipe Calderon said it. He said he was sitting down with George W. Bush. And he said to him, and George W. Bush was like, okay, what do you guys want? And Calderon said, you seen that TV show 24? He said, oh, yeah, I've seen that, yeah. All of those devices, I want that stuff. So it's kind of crazy when you get to the level of what these guys are doing. So that that was Mexico wanted all this kind of equipment. Now you could look at that cynically and like, well, they wanted that stuff to help them work with the cartels and stuff. It was just kind of, but anyway, it wasn't, the US didn't impose this on Mexico. Mexico did, or Calderon did kind of, and I do believe he had a concept that he would kick out the military. He would get some US money, and the cartels would calm down, and it kind of didn't work. The opposite happened, and he got deeper into the conflict. And then I do believe he knew about some of the corruption, but as well as what you say at times is like, at some points it's like, we'll just let the Sinaloa Cartel run things because they let them take out the Zetas, because the Zetas are causing all these kind of problems. So we kind of got to side with them. So certain things he got put into that. He mentioned that towards the end of administration, and this is what he says, he was like sitting around with his guys and was like, okay, think outside the box. What do we do? Shit's not working. And the guys start saying, should we legalize drugs? It's like, they were talking like, let's legalize them. And it was like, wow, that's... so they were seriously discussing this at one point. It's just not, this shit's not working. Now, in terms of the Fast and Furious, he described how they, first of all, he said, this is the way he said it. He said that first of all, they started getting the Americans telling them, well, we've got an operation going on. It's going to be big. You're going to like this. So supposedly it'd be good for them. But then they started arresting some cartel figures, and they knew about. They're like, yeah, we were able to buy guns. They kind of knew some of the Mexican cartel figures kind of realized they were being allowed to be these guns to go through, which gets again a bit like, okay, is there something worse out here? But again, this could just be a netness. These guys realize they're not stopping us. We're taking these guns over the border. And then when it blew up, Felipe Calderon said that the Mexican government deliberately didn't kind of join in the attacks on the Obama administration because they saw the attacks coming very much from like the NRA and stuff. The NRA kind of jumped on this like this just proves our point. You know, they're all in bed. You know, they're arming cartels. This is kind of so they were like, well, why would we support and join with the NRA attacking the Obama administration as well when he said that about that. But it's you know, I mean, interesting his perspective. He's now in Spain and he's now politically in big problems here. You know, the people they want to see him in prison. They want to see Calderon in prison over. You know, they see it as being he was in bed with the Sinaloa Cartel, and Fast and Furious was proof of that, and it was all kind of added up to some big kind of plan. I think there might be a lot of kind of you know, very dumb things being taking place, as well as you know, there is some conspiratorial or you know, very deep corruption as well.
So what do you think about when he went up and essentially brought up the issue that's happening with guns? It seems like, and I think you highlighted this well, where he, you know, kind of approached the situation with a 6-foot pole, because when the NRA was jumping on it, he recognized that that's not exactly the alley he wanted to go down. And it seems like when presidents in Mexico, we're seeing this recently, quote unquote, go to battle with U.S. politicians, it ends up not being the best formula. We've seen this with, you know, the Mexican president just recently. There was a lot of anger coming out from Republicans because he came out and essentially said, after Lindsey Graham was looking to label the group as a terrorist organization, the cartels, and it essentially was calling for looking for ways to mitigate Republicans in future elections, which, again, very controversial. What do you think about him having that choice to step up and speak about the issues of guns? And why do you think we're not seeing more politicians do that present from Mexico? Because, again, that could make a massive difference in making sure that people understand this isn't something that's only affecting here in the U.S. It's that it has, you know, long tentacles that are really creating massive amounts of violence around the world.
When Felipe Calderon, he went to a joint session of Congress and he brought up firearms trafficking. He told me about that, you know, like he was having this crackdown on cartels, and then they started seeing, this is when this kind of escalation was happening, and they were seeing suddenly, you know, their police were being outgunned, and, you know, you're suddenly seeing cartels with 100 guys with AR-15s and AK-47s, and they were buying them from the United States. And so suddenly realizing, like, how can we as a Mexican state fight this problem if they're being so heavily armed from the United States? And that's a continuing issue now. So I think he was justified in doing that. And some of the people saying, you know, you're going to go to the joint session of Congress and you're going to like attack them. But he, you know, went in there and did that. Now that might have kind of helped, you know, that kind of put political pressure. And then he had Fast and Furious, and then it kind of ended up getting knocked off the agenda. So it didn't work. Like they say, in the end, Felipe Calderon's historical legacy was of failure. But I think, you know, he was justified in doing that. If we look at the more recent issues now with Mexico, US, and it's tough on both sides. You know, how do Mexico and the United States? I mean, we need cooperation. We need people coming together and trying to figure out damage limitation, reducing some of the damage on this. And it's hard, but they need to. Now, in terms of the kind of calling cartels terrorist groups, I don't, you know, I'm not outraged by that. I don't think it's like you know, I think there's ways you can see acts they do as terrorism. What I do think is that this is the idea, or what's being put by elements of some Republican figures right now, saying, oh, we're going to bring in the military, we're going to cross over the border, we'll take these guys out. we've got the best military in the world, we can do this. It's a big, difficult, complicated situation. It's not that easy, right? You've got hundreds of thousands of people in these organizations and maybe millions of people involved in these organizations at secondary levels. Even if you cross over the border and kill 1,000 people, doesn't scratch them. You could get find out where the chapitos are and then go in there and we'll take those out. Which the military, they've been doing for like the last 20 years anyway, and it hasn't solved this. Just taking these guys out of military operations, which with US agents there in some cases anyway. Hasn't solved it. You get other guys pop up, and if the US does go over a border and it does an operation and it also kills some civilians at the same time, that creates all kinds of issues. US gets pulled into a real swamp. So it kind of sounds good. It might sound good. I appreciate and sympathize with people saying these guys are seriously bad organizations. That's true. Mexico has been destabilized by these violent organizations. That's true. That the US should care about them spilling over? Yes. That fentanyl is a horrific problem that needs to be confronted? Yes. I agree with all of that. I think the Republicans are right to bring up this rhetoric, to bring up these problems and to say this is important and we need to take this stuff seriously. But look again deeper what are the solutions to this. Really what you want to do. Okay, you need US law enforcement cracking down hard on operations in the United States. You've got to confront the issue of drug addiction in the United States, a big priority, a big political priority. How do you deal with drug addiction, drug use in the US? You've got to stop guns going to these guys. Sure, you've got to work with Mexico on trying to help build up police capacity and fight these things. But these are difficult problems that don't necessarily gain the best headlines. You kind of throw red meat to your base on both sides. People do this. And again, gets back to the kind of broken political system dealing with very, very challenging problems.
When I was